Amendment 11 Suits Against States. Hello again, everybody. Let's begin by looking at Amendment 11 Suits Against the States. This amendment came out of what many believed was a frivolous lawsuit by two South Carolina men against Georgia. It reads, "The judicial power of the United States shall not be construed to extend to any suit in law or equity, commenced or prosecuted against one of the United States by citizens of another state or by citizens or subjects of any foreign state." The amendment did not bar all lawsuits against states in federal courts. For example, as initially interpreted, the 11th Amendment did not bar suits against states when a matter of federal law was at issue, nor did it prevent suits brought against a state by its own citizens. But more recently, a divided Supreme Court has held that states are immune from all lawsuits in federal courts unless they specifically agree to be sued. In layman's terms, as long as you are a government official and you're acting in good faith with respect to the job you have, you're immune from lawsuits. Amendment 12 Election of President. This is one of the more lengthier amendments that was put into effect because of our third election. As it turns out, Thomas Jefferson would win the election, but, and this is the really screwed up process that nobody thought of back then, the second place runner up became vice president. So, in theory, you had two men who disliked each other sharing an office. If you want to read the whole thing, you can pause the video, or you can read the PDF of the slides on Schoology. Otherwise, let's see what it all means. The changes that came about because of Amendment 12 include, first, the president and his or her running mate will be on the same ballot. Neither can be from the same state, as this is a time when state rights were more important than national rights. How many of you are pro Pennsylvania, or pro Mount Pleasant, or pro United States? Back then, most were pro state, so imagine getting two people from the same state and then wanting to advance the cause of their state over the country's needs. This amendment also dictated that if a presidential candidate didn't get the necessary majority of electoral college votes, then the House of Representatives would decide their fate. But not the whole House, just one vote per state. And lastly, this amendment adjusted the qualifications of vice president to be the same as president. After all, we wouldn't want something to happen to the president, and then the replacement would not meet the criteria. Amendment 13 Slavery or Involuntary Servitude. Amendment 13 begins the Reconstruction era amendments, in which our country finally abolishes slavery and any form of indentured servitude. Abraham Lincoln attempted to do this with his Emancipation Proclamation, but it did very little to the slaves in the free states, only rebel or Confederate states. By the time this did become an amendment, Lincoln had already met his fate, but he was aware that it was in Congress. By its adoption, Congress intended the 13th Amendment to take the question of emancipation away from politics. Although some may have questioned whether persons other than African Americans could share in this amendment's protection, the court held that the amendment forbids any other kind of slavery now or hereafter. This amendment, of course, does not apply to criminals who were convicted in the court of law. That's a little different, although chain gangs, one could argue with the chain gangs, but we'll talk more about that when we talk about the court cases. And speaking of, in more recent cases, the Supreme Court has defined involuntary servitude broadly to forbid work forced by the use of or threat of physical restraint or injury or through law. But the Supreme Court has rejected claims that define mandatory community service, taxation, and the draft as involuntary servitude. And no, having to listen to me speak is also not a form of slavery or indentured servitude. Amendment 14 Due Process or Equal Protection. Due process. Folks, this along with the Fifth Amendment make up the tandem of due process, something you need to know and understand should you ever find yourself in legal trouble. This is what the first section has to say. Section 1. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizenship of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of all laws. Let's break this down in 5 easy steps. First, former slave states were passing laws aimed at restricting blacks from certain things, such as voting, eating, and jobs. And the Supreme Court agreed that states had that right. Laws such as separate water fountains, poll taxes, which a tax is used in order to vote, and the government knew many blacks couldn't afford such a tax, so they didn't vote. It wasn't until 1965 and again in 1968 that blacks were to be treated fairly. That's right, folks. In 53 short years. That's it. That's all blacks have truly had their rights. But based on the riots in the past 2 years, it's obvious more needs to be done. Second, blacks would be counted as a whole person, no longer as three-fifths for apportionment purposes. Third, gave blacks protection with the federal government. Fourth, nobody, black, white, or other, could lose life, liberty, or property without having to go in front of a judge first. And lastly, through many Supreme Court rulings, all persons are now protected under the same laws federally. There is so much more we could discuss, but we'll take a look at court cases soon that were affected by the 14th Amendment. Amendment 15, Male Suffrage. Amendment 15 is full male suffrage, or the right to vote. It states, Section 1, the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. To break this amendment down, first, it's all about men. Not all men. Native Americans did not qualify for this amendment because they were governed by tribal laws, and to some extent they are today. Then who? Well, all white men, including the poor and illiterate, and blacks, except where laws block them from voting. And Chinese. Well, they didn't get that right into the United States until after World War II. It was a start, but this amendment did nothing to provide women an equal opportunity, and that won't come until the 19th Amendment. So that takes us to the last 11 amendments. Stay tuned for those. Have a great day, Mount Pleasant.